Okay, guys, here's a way to say this that people can get. Immunizations is like a cancer. One person gets it, they spread it to everybody. So when you get immunized, either from a vaccine, whether it's a GMO vaccine or it's a green vaccine, you are actually spreading the cancer. You're spreading the mutation to everybody in your immediate area. So if you have breast milk that has pathogens in it, you just spread your cancer and disease and chronic illness to your child, who will then go into inflammation, and guess what? They're going to spread that cancer, disease, and chronic illness to another child. And then it cycles into the whole population. Immunizations is like a cancer. When one person gets it, whatever it is, and their body is malnourished, it spreads to the population, every single person. So instead of having a very unique situation, such as being a coal miner, where only the coal miners who have immunocompromised body sustain the black lung. No, somebody takes their disease, puts it in an immunization, and they immunize everybody and their mother. They took that coal miner's disease and they gave it to everybody that's willing to pay for it. And it doesn't get kept with the just the people who are dealing with that situation that caused that black lung. So immunization is like a cancer. You're taking a pathogen and you're putting it inside a vaccine and you're injecting everybody. It's not for anyone's protection. It's to basically spread the cancer and disease everywhere. That's what it does. If you weren't introduced to that disease at all to begin with, then you wouldn't get it. So when you're immunized, because look, you put one kid and you immunize that one kid and nobody in that room, just take a room, okay? It's all sealed off. Okay, let's say a bubble. We have a community. Let's say like in India, like an island full of just certain people that has no interaction with the Western world, or a bunch of kids in a sealed room in a bubble, and they're eating, a really good food that is, I would say, very healthy. Okay, they're getting jelly juice. They're getting strategic nutrition. So their muscles are developed, or they're growing beautifully. Everybody's wonderful. Or let's say this: they're not even in a bubble. They're just in a classroom. Okay, and they're all great. Nobody's sick. Everybody's great. And then a kid that just got immunized, who just received a bunch of antibodies inside of a vaccine that was injected in them, and they're sniffling and they're sick and all this stuff. And then they walk into this classroom, because they wouldn't have had this disease if it wasn't introduced to their system by a vaccine. Okay? So they walk into this classroom. Guess what? None of these kids have ever been exposed to this pathogen, so it's a new pathogen. Because remember, your adaptive and your innate immune system work in such a way where when you're exposed to a new pathogen, it goes into inflammation and it creates natural killer cells, which in turn create antibodies, and it goes after that pathogen, but it also goes after your body, your cells too, good cells as well. And so you're seeing now every kid come down with some type of reaction from that exposure. So that patient 0 just infected the population. So regardless if it's from, a coal mine, because I've been exposed to the oil refinery here. Now, granted, I was looking on Marathon Oil Refinery, and they have a great rating as far as the EPA. So, so I'm luckier than most. Maybe there's some areas that have a lot more negative elements in their runoff. But, I have no idea how bad or how good. I just see that they run in a war with the EPA, but that's all relative to whatever conditions and whatever standards that they have or met. And we don't know because we're not privy to the numbers. So we're just assuming everything is great, right? So, but now there's people in my town that are sick. Now, whether it's because of the oil refinery or something else, who knows? But somehow I was able to heal in spite of my exposure being next to a freeway behind a truck yard, and then by a train and by an oil refinery, which means that I'm not going to be getting sick. And then when you get sick, I'm not going to be contagious to pass along the pathogen that my body developed from being exposed to a negative element that caused a mutation in my biochemistry. And then that creates inflammation, which then creates a disease, which then infects the population. So that person that is not healthy, that works for an oil refinery, they get black lung disease, they get tuberculosis. And then other immune systems that are not meeting up to the standards, or even not, other immune systems will be exposed to that pathogen because this person was contagious. So let's say the person doesn't leave the house, and then they heal. So they got sick, and this is a personal situation. They got sick, so they stay at home. They don't even go out there. He doesn't even leave his house. So then he recovers. He's not contagious anymore. Like quarantine, right? That's how quarantine is what it means to be quarantined. So he has the antibody, but he's not contagious. He heals and he feels 100% better relative. Maybe he's drinking my jelly juice, who knows? Finally, he's like, okay, I'll drink jelly juice now to repair the damage of that sustained mutation from the body, being malnourished because of the fact of diet, and then being exposed to negative elements like that oil refinery or that coal miner disease. And so, but then he recovers. He's not contagious anymore. He has the antibody, but he's drinking jelly juice. He's doing great. And then he goes back to work. Nobody gets his disease. It stops with him. The disease stops with him. And then there's no need for anyone to get a pathogen of his disease and to be injected by it. There would be no reason, because his body was able to recover. But why he even came down with black lung disease was because he wasn't reinforcing his the cells with nutrients to be able to recover from the exposure to all of the dust. So those that are in the coal mines would be around a continuous amount of negative elements. And yes, they will come down with something relative to what they bring to the table. It probably didn't have to turn into black lung or tuberculosis. But for the reason why it did is because it was left unchecked. They didn't have enough nutrients in their bodies to repair the damage from the mutation of the consistent exposure to the coal dust. So that's how disease gets created, because the body isn't strong enough to be able to stop the pathogen from turning into something malignant and infectious and then contagious. And the fact that they're sick and they're walking around and everybody else is walking around malnourished, that's why they're able to that's why they're getting exposed and then getting afflicted and then creating antibodies, stay at home and recover. And then, then that specific disease is only going to stay within that coal miner's area. It doesn't go outside of that town unless one happens to travel. Let's say you have a coal miner that came down with tuberculosis because he was exposed to the coal mining dust. His body is really run down because not enough nutrition. And then he develops tuberculosis that turns in, that was infectious, that turned contagious. And then he goes out to the general public. And that's how it spreads, right? But then, okay. So when you see some kind of disease, just like the Ebola virus, but as soon as you start administering immunizations regarding that specific disease is when you will see a pandemic. But if you can quarantine a person once they get a sickness, whatever it is, not create an immunization, but you quarantine them, and everybody that gets sick gets quarantined, they go through their process. Yeah, like, keep your kid, at home if your kid's sick, but it doesn't always happen. You could be, and that's the thing, is that there are kids that do get vaccinations and then they go to school, and another kid that wasn't vaccinated is going to catch that immunization vaccine from that kid. But we know we can't legislate morals. We can't keep people at home without their permission. So there's no way to control that. But it doesn't help that we immunize the public with these pathogens. Let nature run its course, not try to play God with nature. And that's what these immunizations are. They're playing God with nature. So that makes complete sense. So some disease could really stay in one area if it's kept contained in one area. Yeah. And the green vaccine isn't any better. So this is why I'm saying, you guys, learn what these antibodies do to people. It's not what's in the vaccinations. It's the fact that it creates antibodies that destroy people and then also create autoimmunity, which then translate into cancer, disease, and chronic illness, especially if it's left unchecked. But exposing your kid to the measles purposely and exposing your kid to these different people who have been afflicted isn't going to help you either. So Sasha Joy Amara, it's not even just vaccinations. It's the fact that people think it's okay to be sick. Okay, it's okay to be sick if you can't help it, but don't purposely put your kid in a situation where they have to build antibodies, because that doesn't help either. That's what I'm trying to say. People say, don't be afraid of disease. Be very afraid of disease, because when you look at your titer test and you're positive for 100 different pathogens, that ought to basically red flag you that these are backdoor triggers that are going to turn into some kind of autoimmune disorder or some kind of cancer, disease, and chronic illness in the future. So now it really is about strategic nutrition. It really is about strategic nutrition, and that we can't stop these pathogens from developing, because everybody has a belief system. They have their own life. They have freedom of movement. We're not going door to door and saying, okay, if you have any sniffle, you can't leave your house. No, nobody is doing that. We don't live in communist China. Not that they do that, but we don't live in a communist country where every single movement you make is being addressed by the authorities. But I've heard that Oregon is now putting cameras in for new mothers with newborns. They're trying to watch to see how the mother is taking care of the newborn. That's where we're headed in some of the states. Allegedly. I mean, it was an article that was done by Moms Against Vaccines and stuff. So it's more than just what's in the vaccine. It's more than that. It's the fact that you purposely put your kid in a situation where they have to build pathogens. If you know that there is a bunch of sickness, I mean, here's the thing. It's going to happen, yes, but it really is about strategic nutrition. Yes, you can't help but put your kid in school because you can't afford to be a stay-at-home mom and homeschool. So you know that is a situation you cannot help it, but you can help going to a measles party. That's not necessary. But but if you stick your kid in public school or even private school, whatever, whenever you're around other people, you have no idea their background, their medical history, nothing. So then what do you do for yourself? You reinforce the strategic nutrition. No, and it's not doing elderberry syrup. No, it's not doing organic food. No, it's not doing, all these different pills, powders, supplements, and detoxes and all that. That is the wrong way to approach reinforcing your kids' strategic nutrition. There's something more, and this is where my agenda is going to be obvious. Jelly juice. Now, there are different levels of jelly juice that you can do. You can dilute it if you need to, just so that way, because it's very strong and it's not exactly smelling great. But if you really want to reinforce the strategic nutrition in your child so they can withstand the onslaught of the amount of pathogens that they're going to be up against when they go into the public forum, you give them the necessary weapons to fight against it. And they're going to become sick because their body was not exposed. If they've never been vaccinated, which is fine, their body has not been exposed to these type of pathogens. But you reinforce their strategic nutrition and you build up their nutrients, they can be able to recover from that initial mutation, and the sickness won't be as long. So if they do happen to get exposed to the measles, it's not a bad thing. And the longevity of the disease will be very shortened. I mean, so the time of having that sickness is going to be shortened. The people who have a very low immune system, the sickness drags on, and it's for months. Someone that has a stronger body will be able to get through the pathogens and deal with all of that and reinforce and rebuild the broken cell structures from the mutations. And they're not aging, but they're growing and developing, but they're not mutating other parts of their systems. Okay, so you anti-vaxxers on my page who haven't really discovered jelly juice too much, understand what antibodies are. They're not a good thing. Understand that immunity, whether it's natural immunity or synthetic, is still two sides of the same coin. Putting your kid in a measles party is no different than getting a vaccine or getting, whether it's a GMO vaccine or whether it's getting a green vaccine or whether it's putting them in a measles party. All those three things are detrimental. But when you do put your kid in a public school system, they're going to be exposed. And a vaccine is not going to protect them. What's going to protect them is the fact that their body is strong with nutrition and that you know how to overcome the damage from that initial exposure. Because they're going to have to get exposed regardless, whether it's in a vaccine that has backdoor triggers, or whether it's exposure from a vaccinated person, or whether it's exposure from somebody that just happened to be at a measles party with you. Because all of the aging process and cancer, disease, and chronic illness is the amount of natural killer cells and mutations your body sustained over a course of a lifetime that was left unchecked and not reversed and regenerated cells. That is what aging and cancer, disease, and chronic illness is the amount. Is all the positives next to the name of each of the disease on your titer test. Okay, that's what that is. And since we cannot force people to stay at home when they're sick, we have to know how to overcome this exposure. And it's not organic food or elderberry syrup. Elderberry syrup is full of hormone-producing elements such as antibiotics, spices, as well as it feeds cancer, candida. When I see an anti-vaxxer promoting elderberry syrup, they are actually missing the point. Because there are three things that kill people either immediately or over time. That is the candida, fungus, too many antibodies, and a hormonal imbalance. And when you feed your kid elderberry syrup, guess what? You're inducing hormones, and then you're feeding the candida, and in turn, you're also destroying, because you're bringing in negative elements, so then you're creating antibodies. And then all three of these things are playing off each other. And so your kid becomes even more immunocompromised and more susceptible of having of cancer disease. So they create their own, well, they don't create their own, but they, the more they're exposed to negative elements, it then turns into another type of disease. Or they're picking up every single germ and every single disease, and the body isn't able to fight it off quick enough. And so they sustain all of these different issues. And then you have the chronic illness, and they start getting, oh gosh, let's say eczema, psoriasis, ADD. You start seeing mutations, start seeing behavior problems. You start seeing whatever juvenile disease that comes up. So I cringe when I see of anti-vaxxers still promoting colloidal silver, promoting elderberry syrup, promoting garlic, promoting some kind of detox. It's more than just staying away from a vaccine. It's more than just being exposed to getting natural immunity. That's all marketing in the holistic allopathic world. When you have too many antibodies, it's no different than mixing the wrong blood types together. Okay? So immunizations create so many antibodies as if you were mixing blood types together, because so much antigen turns into antibodies, and in turn, it will then thicken up the blood and shut the body down. This is why you don't give an O negative person AB positive blood, okay? So immunizations, no matter what they are, and even sickness, is like a cancer. Because it spreads. And they're doing it purposely, both the allopathic and the holistic people. It's two sides of the same coin. When you put your kid in a measles party, when you get a green vaccine or you get a GMO vaccine, regardless of what other adjuvants or additives are in there, you're still inducing antibodies. And then the practices of detoxing these children from the vaccines is then inducing hormones. And now your kid has a hormonal imbalance because of your belief system, because you get caught up in wanting to build up antibodies, and then you're turning to elderberry syrup that then promotes hormone imbalance as well as feeds the candida and fungus. There are people in your world that are promoting elderberry syrup, doing just that. This is what they're creating. They're creating a tinderbox, and then the kid's going to come down there, wonder why does my kid have autism? Why does my kid have all these diseases? They never got a vaccination. Oh, then they blame the pro-vax people. And then the blame game comes into play. The blame game comes into play. And that's what you see out there. The pro-vaxxers are blaming the anti-vaxxers, and the anti-vaxxers are blaming the pro-vaxxers, but no one's taking personal responsibility. And then each of them are then utilizing prescription drugs or detoxes or elderberry syrup to deal with the symptoms, which then induce all of these things: more natural killer cells, more candida and fungus, and more of a hormonal imbalance. Do you see how you're getting played, anti-vaxxers and pro-vaxxers? And then guess what it turns into? An aging, decrepit population. That's what it turns into. So immunizations, regardless of where you got it from, is like a cancer. How you can stop it is your personal responsibility to understand strategic nutrition. And it ain't the organic world. It ain't the elderberry syrup world. It ain't the detox world. It ain't the pills, powders, and supplements, MLMs world. It's none of that. It's not the lemon juice, the lime juice, the kombucha, the apple cider vinegar, the bentonite clay, the zeolite, the baking soda. It's none of that. It's not Diet Nature's Earth. It's not some, garlic and honey type concoction. It's none of that. But yet the trendy, holistic people love to turn to that because remember, they're working from an opioid addiction, which is hormones, because oxytocin is very addictive. It's a drug. Cannabis promotes hormones. It's a drug. A lot of drug addicts, even in the holistic world, but they won't call themselves that because they have different names for the different things, so it doesn't sound so bad. And then your perception of what a drug addict is all relative to your, your background, your belief system, your lifestyle. There's a lot of hormonally imbalanced anti-vaxxers who play in the organic field. A lot. Okay, there you go. That's it. That's all I had to say. Thanks. Bye.